At some point, every government says the same thing. We control our own money. It sounds obvious, comforting even. But here's the uncomfortable truth. When governments are deep in debt, they don't really control money anymore. They manage it. They negotiate with it. Sometimes they beg it. And the people who actually control it almost never appear on ballots. Pause on that thought. Because right now, global government debt is over $90 trillion. That number is so large it has lost meaning, but its consequences haven't. This question matters now because the world is quietly shifting from a system run by elected states to one constrained by debt, markets, and incentives no one voted for. And once you see how it works, it's very hard to unsee. Let's start with the simple version we're all taught. Governments spend money. They collect taxes. If they run short, they borrow. Central banks help manage inflation. Everything stays under control. That story works until debt becomes permanent, not a temporary tool, but the foundation. Most modern governments no longer plan to pay their debt back. They plan to roll it over forever. When a government borrows, it doesn't walk into a vault and grab cash. It issues bonds. A bond is a promise. I'll pay you back later with interest. Those bonds are sold to buyers. Who are the buyers? Pension funds, insurance companies, banks, foreign governments, investment funds, and yes, central banks. At first, this looks harmless, responsible, even. But here's the first quiet shift in power. Once a government depends on constant borrowing, it must keep bond buyers happy, not voters. Buyers. Interest rates become a leash. If investors believe a government is reckless, they demand higher interest. Higher interest means higher costs. Higher costs mean budget pressure. Budget pressure means political pain. So policies begin to change not because citizens demand it, but because markets do. That's not a conspiracy. That's math. Now, at scale, some governments refinance trillions of dollars every year, not new spending, old debt. Miss that refinancing window, and the system locks up. This is where central banks enter the story. Officially, central banks are independent. They don't take orders from politicians. That independence is supposed to protect the currency. But when government debt grows large enough, central banks stop being neutral referees. They become the last buyer standing. During crises, central banks buy government bonds to keep markets calm. This is called quantitative easing. The phrase sounds technical, boring. What it really means is this: if no one else wants your debt, the central bank will buy it. That keeps interest rates low. It keeps governments solvent. It keeps the system moving. But it also blurs a critical line, because now the government's survival depends on money creation, and money creation changes who pays. Not through taxes, but through purchasing power. Inflation doesn't feel like a policy. It feels like bad luck. Prices rise. Savings shrink. Wages lag. No vote is taken. No bill is passed. The cost is distributed quietly. This is the uncomfortable math. Debt doesn't disappear. It moves from balance sheets into daily life. Now let's talk about control. If a government raises taxes too much, voters react. If it cuts spending too deeply, voters react. But bond markets react faster, in days, sometimes hours. Currencies fall. Interest spikes. Capital leaves. This creates a hierarchy. At the top, capital that can move instantly. Below it, governments trying to appear stable. At the bottom, citizens who absorb the consequences slowly. This isn't theory. We've watched it happen. In the Eurozone crisis, elected governments fell, but bond yields decided the timeline. In emerging markets, a single downgrade can wipe out years of growth. Even powerful nations aren't immune. When debt is large enough, every policy decision carries an invisible audience. Will markets tolerate this? That question quietly shapes budgets, reforms, and priorities. Now, here's the irony. Governments still print the money. They still issue the currency. They still pass the laws. But control isn't about authorship. It's about constraints. A deeply indebted government operates inside a narrow corridor. Spend too much, confidence breaks. Tighten too hard, growth collapses. Raise rates, debt servicing explodes. Lower rates, inflation returns. Every path has a cost, and someone else sets the tolerance. This is where the story becomes subtle. There is no single villain, no secret council. Control emerges from structure, from incentives, from a system where money flows faster than democracy moves. Bond markets don't care about elections. Central banks don't care about popularity. Capital doesn't care about fairness. They care about risk, return, and credibility. And credibility is fragile. One bad budget, one political standoff, one unexpected shock. Suddenly, the question isn't What do voters want? It's how do we stop this from spiraling? That's when emergency measures appear. Temporary controls, temporary purchases, temporary guarantees. Temporary has a habit of becoming permanent. Over time, the system adapts. Governments learn which promises matter. Markets learn how far central banks will go. Citizens learn, slowly, that money feels less solid than it used to, and trust erodes. Not dramatically, quietly. Here's the deeper risk most people miss. When debt dominates decision-making, the future gets discounted. Long-term investments become harder. Structural reform becomes politically dangerous. Short-term stability wins, again and again. This creates a strange loop. Debt requires growth. Growth requires stability. Stability requires debt support. The system works until it doesn't. And when it breaks, control doesn't return cleanly to governments. It fragments between central banks, emergency institutions, global capital flows. Decisions are made fast. Explanations come later, sometimes much later. So who really controls money when governments are deep in debt? Not politicians alone, not central banks alone, not markets alone. Control is shared and diluted, shaped by obligations made years ago, by interest rates set in response to fear, by confidence that can vanish overnight. Money becomes less a tool and more a balancing act. And here's the final uncomfortable thought. The system doesn't require collapse to fail people. It only requires persistence, years of quiet adjustment, gradual loss of purchasing power, permanent emergency policies. No crisis moment, no clear villain, just a slow shift in who money serves. So the next time you hear a leader say, "We control our currency," ask a simpler question. Who controls the consequences? And how long can that balance hold before control slips entirely into inertia?